evening. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to Talking Point. My name is Faraz Patel. We thank you, Jazakallah, the viewer, for joining us here on Hilaal TV, DSTV channel 347. Close to 10 days ago, the Congress of South African Students hosted their elective conference, electing new leadership, to deal with a lot of the challenges that the youth are facing at this very moment. And joining me in studio, I'd like to welcome an NEC member from COSAS, Siphiwe Maname. Siphiwe, thank you so much for joining us. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Patel, and it's good to be here.
Please call me Faraz.
Oh,
Please
Mr.
call me Faraz. Yeah.
Yes,
Please do call me Faraz. Yeah.
Mr. Faraz.
Siphiwe, when we look at COSAS 45 years ago as opposed to 2024, where do you see the differences, or where do you see the similarities in terms of the COSAS of 1979 as to the one now in 2024?
Well, in 1979, there was a need for students to make a cry about the level of education or the type of education they were receiving. And still, in the current day and age, there's still a cry about the education system, the injustice, the inequality that is there in the education system. So the need then and now, it's still the same. Yeah.
And I mean, when you look at 1979, I mean, most of the challenges were with regards to, you know, the Afrikaans language, which was, I mean, opposed by many people of color, especially black Africans. I mean, we don't need to talk about Soweto. Everyone knows about Soweto, and this is 3 years after the actual uprising. And COSAS really took the fight, didn't they, to the National Party at the time. Yeah. You know, obviously you've got banned leaders of the ANC, the likes of Nelson Mandela, Oliver Tambo, Walter Sisulu, Ahmed Kathrada, the names go on. And then you've got this youth wing that is now taking the fight to the National Party based on one thing, the fight for equal education.
Equal education, yeah.
And that was obviously the necessity at the time for COSAS to be there, wasn't it? Yeah.
It was necessary for it to be there. Even when you read about it, it will always be at the center of everything that will happen in the black communities. Every revolution that happened, you would find COSAS at the center. And one interesting fact is that when you look at people who were inmates then, people who were jailed and all, most it was students. So it was school-going pupils. Yeah.
SESCO, the ANC Youth League, and COSAS, I mean, they were important in working together, weren't they? Especially in the 1980s, in trying to make sure that even then the battle for equal education was happening. I mean, how important was it for those three to be working together at that time?
It was important, as it's still important even today, to say we have what we call a PYA, the Progressive Youth Alliance, where you have us as COSAS who are leading the revolution in schools. You have SASCO leading the revolution in higher institutions of learning. Then you have the Youth League that is leading the revolution in the communities with all young people, including ourselves as COSAS and SASCO. So it's important because you can't have a youth league that comes in the school setting to address school issues when there is COSAS. You can't have a youth league that goes to a higher institution to address issues of students in varsity while there's SASCO. So it also assists with a lot of things. Coordination, you have COSAS coordinating scholars, you have SASCO coordinating students, then you have the youth league coordinating young people, employed, unemployed, and even then, it was that way.
Siphiwe, if we now shift to 2024, the need then was to have some sort of military outlook to it, some sort of radicalism with regards to it. How does COSAS view itself in 2024?
Well, COSAS is still relevant. We still have a two-tier education system, which part of our resolution speaks about that, to say we want one education system. The education system should be nationalized. We support the Pela Bill and all. So it's still necessary. It's still there, radical as it was in 1979 in its formation. We are still radical even today to say, and it's worse now because we have a counter-revolutionary, a racist minister from the Democratic Alliance who wants to reverse all the gains of democracy in the education sector. So we are still there, and you are still going to see more of us making demands, crying to say the policies which COSAS has made, those policies shouldn't be reversed, because we did influence many policies in the Department of Education, and none of those policies should be reversed.
I'm going to touch on Siphiwe Maname in the next segment, Siphiwe. You speak of radicalization. Does radicalization in today's schooling environment still work? I ask this because you're not fighting the apartheid government. You're practically fighting what some would say either private institutions or maybe government not enforcing certain policies. So do you still believe as COSAS that radicalization is the way to go in the year 2024?
When you're dealing with government, you need to be radical, because we do sit in the same table with the government. We do engage the government on many issues. But if those issues are not attended, the only alternative or the only result we have, it's only to be radical and take our fight to the streets, to the department and all. But radicalism is not our first resort on fixing issues. We do write letters, we do sit down with the government, the department, and speak of different issues. But if those issues are not resolved, then being radical is our last resort.
We look at the schooling system today. It faces challenges, and I'm going to touch on that in the next segment. Do you feel that the way basic education is heading, and I want to talk of the last 10 years because we've seen a massive change with regards to that. Do you feel that basic education is moving in the right direction the way it's supposed to be? I ask this because obviously, things had to be digitized. Many parents are saying that it's difficult to get their children in the schools where they are at this very moment because the digitized system has made it very difficult. I just want to get your take on it because it's something that the current Gauteng Premier, Panyaza Lesufi, when he was the MEC for education in the Gauteng province, really pushed hard for.
Yes. In the Gauteng Department of Education, the online system, how they apply and all, it has always been a challenge because every beginning of the year, we still have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of students not being in class and not receiving education. But we've seen a decrease every year of the number. So meaning that even parents now are getting used to the system. But I also think they have walk-in centers where parents can walk in, register and do all that. So even that it's assisting. But I think if they can give parents just more time to apply, maybe even create a program, an awareness program, adverts and them on television, say this is how maybe you apply and all in all. We are going to see less and less of people people struggling with the online system.
After the break, I continue my conversation with Siphiwe Maname. We're going to be talking about some of the challenges the youth face in terms of today's modern schooling and how COSAS is going to assist with regards to that. Do stay tuned. Welcome back. I'm in conversation with Siphiwe Maname, who is an NEC member from COSAS. Now, Siphiwe, I want to touch on Minister Siphiwe Maname. I don't have to tell you, you know, Government of National Unity. You've got different ministers from different parties that have, of course, occupied these positions. As COSAS, when obviously this was before this year's elective conference that happened, that the appointment of Gwagube came in as basic education minister. Was COSAS behind the decision for that to happen? Now, I ask this because obviously it was done by an ANC president, President Cyril Ramaphosa, and he has the prerogative as the head of state. What was COSAS' initial reaction to her being appointed basic education minister?
Well, we were taken aback to give such an important ministry to a DA party. Even in the corridors when we were speaking to say we wonder the pronouncements of the president, how are they going to be? We never thought that the ministry will be given to the Democratic Alliance. And because of the party and its policies it holds, to say they are anti-everything that is about the progression of a black person, of they don't want an equal society and all. So we never thought that we are going to be in this situation where we have a minister of the DA in the ministry who we knew is going to try by all means to influence the policies of the DA in the ministry and all. Yeah.
She wasn't there for the signing of the Bella Bill. Was that something that upset COSAS?
Yeah, yes, it did, because it was a counter-revolutionary act, a paper tiger type of a reaction to say the president is the head of state, the president is the principal of state. So once a ministry has a function like signing of a new policy, whether whatever is happening with the minister, the minister should be there. But he then made, we had comments to say no, she did speak to the president about not attending and all. Whether she spoke to the president or not, the bill is an important bill, one of the huge policies, the most progressive, by the way, policies that the department has ever had. So at least if the minister was there to show face, to show that she is in support, because our reaction is that if you don't attend the signing of the policy, you're not in support of the policy. So that was our reaction. But we want her to implement that policy. She will implement that policy, because if she doesn't implement the policy, us and her, we are still going to make a lot of noise about many of the bills in the policy that must be implemented, and we want to see them as in yesterday.
Has COSAS tried to reach out to her to try and supposedly speak about things that COSAS has raised, the issues that you have raised, the resolutions, and you'll mention some of those resolutions that you find that you may need to approach her. So has there been an approach by yourself as the leadership of COSAS?
We've got 10 days in office. We are still waiting to sit our NEC meeting so that we can conclude on when the SGO office should write to the department to say we want to see the minister and his team, the deputy minister and them, firstly to introduce ourselves, also to give them the resolutions of our Congress, and also maybe to see how we can fix some of the issues that are there in different provinces and more.
Budget cuts has been a big talking point, but I'm going to touch on that in a bit because I want to spend more time on that, Siphiwe. Let's look at the current state of the schools. There's many challenges, but there's one. We've seen its ugly head being reared this year, the racism that has been occurring in some of the schools. Pretoria High School for girls. Some are saying there's a bit of dragging on the feet there, nothing's happening. You speak of the radicalism. Is that where COSAS radicalism will come in and say, well, if there's racism happening in schools, then there has to be some sort of thorough investigation there?
Obviously, we will meet anarchy with anarchy. We will meet arrogance with arrogance. The one part that we all need to consider is that racism doesn't only happen at the Pretoria School of
High
Girls.
School of Girls,
Yeah,
yes.
High School of Girls. Obviously, we are aware of the situation and all because it's the children of the middle class. Most of them are in social media and all, so they can voice whatever that is happening. Imagine about schools in Free States, in farms, children who don't have internet and all. What more about them? Racism is all over. We are aware that racism is still in most of the schools. Some children speak about, some they don't. But we are aware, and we've got awareness campaign that we are going to push on racism. Every school where there's a COSAS member, they will be conscious about racism, what to do, which channels to contact in case a situation of racism occurs, whether coming from a fellow a learner classmate or it coming from a teacher or a staff at the school, but they will be aware of what to do when they are faced with such a situation.
The education that's supposed to happen in schools is supposed to be education that is future-based, not current-based.
Yeah.
Is COSAS, along with the Basic Education Department, when you do meet, when obviously you guys meet for your NEC meeting, is COSAS willing to say, right, let's institute a program which teaches children about racism, but not just about racism which they can take to the future, but racism at the current? Because it seems maybe there are schools where racism is inherent within some of these children. It's taught at home. I would like to think it's not taught in schools, especially if you go to a multiracial school.
Yeah.
So how does COSAS then approach that? Should there be a need for them to be involved with basic education and maybe other NGOs or Chapter 9 institutions which can go ahead, do this education, and hope for the best?
You know, part of the resolutions of conference are that we want a new curriculum that is not only going to speak to the current situations that we are facing, but it's also going to be future-based, and it will also communicate to the higher institution curricula to say it must be relevant. These two curriculums, the basic and the higher education, they must communicate to each other. But coming to your question, yes, we are part of the new curriculum will be on introducing new subjects that are going to speak to the current challenges that we are having, your racism, your gender-based violence, your rape, and them. We want a curriculum that will speak to those issues, teach them at a young age to say, be conscious about these things. These things do happen. These things are there. So how does one know more about these things, have more knowledge about them? It is only possible through a new curriculum. Also to different legislatures, the programs that they normally run out, civic programs. We want civic education now in classrooms to happen where maybe a legislature comes, speaks to issues of rape, racism, and all the societal issues that we have.
Gender-based violence, you've brought that up because it's not just limited to outside of the schools, it's happening within the schools.
Schools, yes.
The president signed at the start of Women's Month a new bill to target gender-based violence. And there's still this belief that it's going to happen in schools. How does COSAS deal with that in an aggressive way? Because you've said it, radicalism needs to be met with radicalism, and gender-based violence is probably one of the highest forms of radicalism in a violent way that we have in society.
Yes, I think it all then goes back to having an intentional curriculum, having an intentional government, having an intentional law enforcers, to say all of these even us as stakeholders, we must be intentional in our approach to say, how are we going to eradicate all of these things? GBV, rape, I mean, you name the societal issues that are there. We must be intentional. We must come with programs that are going to directly speak to such issues. We have a program called the Right to Learn program. That program doesn't only speak to corporal punishment. It also speaks about GBV. Say even GBV at home, it deprives a child from learning, from taking out her best or his best in class because of the situations that are happening at home. So the Right to Learn campaign, we engage all stakeholders. The SAPS are part of the Department of Education's stakeholders. They are also engaged to say we must be intentional in eradicating all of these societal issues that we have, and we must be very, very intentional in doing so.
You spoke of corporal punishment before we go to the break. What's COSAS' take on corporal punishment?
We don't want corporal punishment in our schools. There is no way that if you want me to learn in a classroom, you'll force me by beating me. There are many...
but it's happening, you know that, but it's happening.
It is happening.
Especially in township schools and in the rural areas.
And all.
It's happening.
It does happen.
Yeah. So how does COSAS then get this? How is COSAS going to deal with it? Because not everyone has a phone.
Yeah.
And some children are fearing for their lives because they need to go to school. They're either coming from single parent households, most of them being just having a mother who's a breadwinner at the end of the day.
When we speak with our provinces and our regions, we want every school to be a COSAS base. We want every school to have a COSAS branch. We want every school-going child to be a COSAS member, whether you're in a public school, whether you are in a private institution. But we want COSAS members in each and every school. So us having members in each and every school, obviously we are going to know all these things that are happening and we are going to act on them.
So they just need to go ahead and become a member. Is it as simple as that for them to do that?
You know, being a member, we are going to also introduce an online membership where you can, from the comfort of wherever you are, you can just join COSAS. And then obviously our administrative team is going to do follow-up. Maybe if there's a need for us to come and bring leaders who are going to launch a branch and all, it's going to happen. But we want to have COSAS in each and every school across the country.
After the break, I continue my conversation with Siphiwe Maname from COSAS. The question of how they're going to be working with not just basic education, but also higher education. When these pupils leave their school, they're going to become students in university. But many of them have the challenges of funding. NSFAS is one of those names that come into the equation. We'll be having that conversation after the break. Welcome back to Talking Point. I'm still in conversation with Siphiwe Maname from COSAS. Siphiwe, part of many of the challenges high school students, pupils have, is that the funding of NSFAS. A few weeks ago, I had Colin Malachi, was, of course, the ANC Youth League president, and he said that NSFAS now, there has to be a real look at the way the organization operates because of the maladministration, the corruption. You've got a new minister within higher education also. What is this COSAS take with regards to that? Because many Black African students struggle when it comes to funding to go into higher institutions.
Yes, as COSAS, we don't have much stance on higher institution issues because we've got a sister organization called SASCO.
SASCO, yes, of course. Yeah.
Although obviously we, as a pre-tertiary organization, we still have few people coming to us to say, I'm having challenges with this, I'm having challenges with that. But with the issue of NSFAS, we are also going to look at it. Part of our resolutions, we must look into the basic and higher education relations that we have with them. So we are going to attend to the issue of NSFAS. Possibly we will meet the board of NSFAS and see what it has in store for pre-tertiary students and how it's going to be a much easier way of them accessing higher education and accessing funds from NSFAS. Yeah.
In terms of your resolution, what is it that COSAS wants to look at in terms of making it easy? Of course, there has to be criteria. So from a criteria perspective, what is it that COSAS wants to maybe look at to say, this is what we need in order for him or her to actually qualify for a potential funding, which is going to come from NSFAS? Because obviously NSFAS now, when this new administration, sets in, part of what they want to do is they can probably look at cost cutting as one of that. So how does COSAS say, let's try and get the students the funding, but also making sure it meets criteria, so there isn't any misspending coming from their part?
By the way, if a member of COSAS, academic excellence, we advocate for academic excellence. And in order for one to be a member of COSAS, you must achieve more than 50% average. So that is our criteria of being a member. So we believe with that criteria alone, many of our members do qualify to be members of higher institutions. But we are going to speak with NSFAS, maybe see what is their funding criteria, to say in order for NSFAS to fund any person, this is the criteria and all. But we are also aware of maladministration, the corruption that happens at NSFAS, and also we must deal with that aspect of things. To say, when we want to liberate our people, we don't need all this maladministration, we don't need all this corruption, because one of the tools that one can use to be successful when you're coming from a disadvantaged background and all, it's only education. And some of these learners only have NSFAS, by the way, because their parents don't have anything, their parents don't even have money to take them to an institution of higher learning. It's only NSFAS they have. So it's a cry and a plea we are going to make to the board, to the management of NSFAS, to say, when you do all the things that you do, think about the child who only has this institution alone in order to come out from the shack or the shambles they are in.
Siphiwe, I want to go back to basic education. Nutrition, food that was being given in schools. We've seen, and I want to touch on the budget cuts. So before that, just your take on the budget cuts that have happened. Of course, National Treasury institutes the money. They've seen basic education as probably a department where it needs to happen. Minister Gwarube had said that corruption and maladministration were to be blamed for all of this. I just want to get your take with regards to the budget cuts and its devastation it's probably going to have, not just on teachers, but on pupils at large.
Yes. The sad part, I've been following the department officials' interviews about these budget cuts and all. And none of them are coming with a program to speak to how they are going to make sure that teachers, scholars are not affected by these budget cuts. All they have to say is that it's a result of corruption, maladministration. Who did the maladministration? Who did the corruption? Was it educators or was it the scholars? It was none of these parties but themselves. So the take that we have... By
themselves, you mean? The previous administration?
The administration, the current and the previous. Because
But you can't blame the current. The current's only been there for a few months.
If the current is saying there was corruption, there must be whistleblowers. They must tell us who took what money, how much did they take, and there must be follow-up. So them being quiet, it's them being part of the corruption that they are speaking about. But also, what we have to say about the budget cut is that the executives including themselves as ministers, DMs, the DGs, and the directors and the top management of every department. There must be salary cuts in order to fix this issue. The budget issue. In order for us to fix the budget issue, there must be salary cuts, expenditure cuts on the executives, on the cars and all. There must be cuts.
Okay, on one side, you may have a point where expenditure on the cars and the unnecessary stuff, but
the allowances,
there must
be
but salaries, they'll turn around and tell you, well, we can't take a salary cut given the inflation and the high cost of living. So what do you say to that then?
Must we cut feeding schemes?
No. I don't think we should, because feeding schemes are important.
Must some educators lose their jobs? Because if an educator loses his or her job, contracts are not being renewed. You are simply taking all their salary. You are not even cutting. You are taking it. So we are saying with them, we are not taking their salaries. We are saying there must be salary cuts because they are public servants. When you are a servant, you mustn't be paid more than the people you are serving, because you are a servant. You mustn't benefit more. So they are benefiting more, and us that are benefiting less, they want to take more from us that are benefiting less. So it really makes no sense. It's just the spirit of greediness that has possessed all of them. So we are simply saying, starting with the minister, there must be a salary cut.
Okay. On nutrition, you've mentioned that feeding schemes. Those things. I mean, because here's the take, especially in township schools, especially in informal settlements, rural areas. This is the only way that child can get food, and it's been taken away potentially.
Yeah.
So, as COSAS, how are you going to deal with this? Because every child has a right to have food. It's not just it's not part of the Constitution. It's a United Nations resolution that has been passed.
Every child should have. The sad part is that some of these kids, this is the only meal that they have. From home, where they come from, they don't have food. They don't have means to have food. This is the only possible way they have something in their stomachs. So when you have officials of the department who want to take this away, say, no, we don't have budget, some things are necessary expenditure and all. And when you're looking at this unnecessary expenditure, you look at this feeding scheme. I heard the minister saying some of the things that they must look into, it's the security aspect, that they mustn't be the ones who provide security anymore, and all. You'll speak with the Minister of Police and all of those things. And we have spokespeople of the department and officials who want to defend that thing. There's nothing you will defend. This is the only thing that we have. This is the only possible, even when he speaks of safety, security and all. You have community members, CPFs, who don't get paid, who are doing this thing, by the way, voluntarily. So say we want to volunteer to look after our children, to make sure our children are safe in schools. They're doing it voluntarily. Then you have a minister who says, no, it's unnecessary expenditure, as if there's some money going to these CPFs and the people who cut schools. So, but we just pray and hope that they won't cut feeding schemes. The safety wardens that are in our schools, they won't be fired or chased because it's so-called unnecessary expenditure. If that happens, I want to tell you this one. If that happens, we are going to take COSAS members. In this country, there won't be any teaching and learning that will happen. Even in suburbs, even in the elite places, there won't be any teaching and learning that happens. We are going to occupy the union buildings. We'll make sure that Minister Khwarube doesn't sleep at night, because we will be there day and night making sure that feeding schemes, the security wardens and them, they are protected.
Do you think government will listen to you?
Government will listen to us. It will have no any other choice because we will be all over. We'll make it difficult for government to function.
I want to stay on feeding schemes because I'm sure you've heard a number of children have died from poisoning or some are sitting in hospital still. And that raises the question of procurement of these foods. So there's no quality, it's more quantity because you're feeding a lot more. In 1 minute, Siphiwe, how does that procurement process need to be managed from a COSAS perspective?
Well, you know, the one of the things that I'm against about the Pella bill is having the HOD managing everything, having the utmost power from how the budget of the schools and all. I'm totally against that thing. Currently, the department is the one that administers the procurement of these food nutrition and all schemes that are happening in schools. And it's evident that they are failing at what they are. We saw at KZN, we had them fighting, some of these companies fighting, blaming the department, say some of us are not yet paid, or they gave contracts to these people, and. So we must really look into some of these things to say, how do we make sure that we don't have these issues? Maybe we cut procurement and we say social development because it does have some food and it issues food parcels and all. Maybe we have them who will do this food nutrition in our schools.
And of course, Sisi Tolashe is our social development
is our
minister,
social development
and ANC Women's League president also at the same time. Well, we're going to be continuing this conversation after the break. Do stay tuned. We'll be back after this with more on Talking Point. Welcome back. We're in the final segment of this conversation with Siphiwe Maname from COSAS. He serves as its NEC member. Siphiwe, let's go to some of the rural schools. I mean, we can even touch on the informal settlement ones. A lot of their challenges has been not just getting the education, but going to the schools. And many have criticized the ANC-led government, because it was in government for 30 years, for not attending to the situation where you get toilets, you're getting children crossing rivers, putting their lives on the line just to get education. How does COSAS, with its new resolutions now, say we need to put an end to this? Because a child's right to education must not involve them going through all of these dangerous paths just to be taught in a classroom.
Well, the budget cuts, which they are telling us about, to say they are going to be budget cuts for this and that, that's the same thing we are going to them with, to say we want salaries of executives, we want salaries of the top management of all departments. Their salaries must be cut. We want them to be cut. We want more budget for public works so that it can build proper schools, it can build proper bridges. We want more budget for the Department of Education so that we can have an efficient education system so that teaching and learning can continue normally. We want more budget for all the stakeholders that are there, to say there must be budget so that teaching and learning can be possible. Because if you look at provinces like Eastern Cape, Limpopo, and all these rural provinces you are speaking about, they've got the same issues. If it's not pit toilets, you have a travel issue. Say maybe there's no bridge, learners have to cross a river, and you have all those issues. So if we have more budget for public works, we have more budget for the DBE, we can build more bridges, we can build more schools, closer schools, to say we don't have learners who are going to walk an hour, 2 hours to school. We are going to have closer schools, more schools, and all of those things. So we are going to sit with many departments to see if there can be any amicable solutions we can come with in order to make sure that teaching and learning continues and we have one education system that will compete globally.
You spoke about occupying the uni building should, of course, some of these budgets not go into the enhancement of many of the learners. President Cyril Ramaphosa is the ANC president, head of state. Do you believe under his leadership all of this can happen? I ask this because he is there in Luthuli House, where you guys are right now. Do you feel that speaking to him either through the Secretary General Fikile Mbalula will get the message across to him, which in turn, as the head of the executive, can pass this message through? Do you not think that would maybe be a more amicable way of communicating?
Obviously, the first step is going to be the ANC SGO, the ANC officials, to say we must give them our POA, we must give them the resolutions of our Congress, to say because we are the party that is in governance, most of our resolutions, they must be met. We are going to, our first stop, it's the ANC SGO. We must sit with the SGO of the ANC so that the deployees of the ANC, they get to be spoken to and told to say, we want our education system to compete globally. And the possible way COSAS is bringing solutions for that. So we are going to go and meet all of these people with solutions to say how are we going to compete globally and how are we going to have an education system that every parent will want their children to subscribe to or to have.
Fikile Mbalula opened up this year's elective conference of COSAS, and he mentioned something about leadership starting within the school, whether it is, of course, through activism or political education. Many pupils would say, oh, why should I get involved in politics? It means nothing because not really going to contribute. How important is it within curriculum that pupils understand, of course, the history of whichever liberation movements it is, whether it's here or across the SADC region, but of course the importance of knowing what politics is, so that when they go into higher educations and ultimately go into the workspace, they have an idea of politics having an influence on how the economic, and understanding the economic system, which in turn affects the country from a revenue perspective.
Well, I said earlier we want a curriculum change. We want a
Is
new
that part
curriculum.
what you'd like to see?
Our new curriculum says we want more on vocational education. Second to it, we want not only numeracy and what do you call it, numeracy and languages studies, but we want also subjects like history to be a must. And history, we mustn't be told about the Hitlers and them. We must learn about our own African liberation, how African countries were liberated. We want to know more about the likes of Kwame Nkrumah. We want to know more about the likes of Thomas Sankara. We want to know more about the liberation of the black people in Africa, not in the USA, not in any other part of the country, but in Africa. Also, coming to having young people who are patriotic, having young people who are interested about issues of national importance. You know, I always say it's important to know what's happening around you, because once you are conscious about what is happening around you, you get to, it shows that you are living, it shows that you are a human being. I mean, even the things that we watch on television that are being broadcasted on our TVs. They don't build us for the kind of a society we want to see ourselves living in, because a society that we want to see ourselves living in is a non-racial, equal, a national democratic society. We want to see ourselves living in that kind of a society. But we every profession, every sector, every person needs to contribute to this national democratic society. And obviously it has to start from the youngest of age to build this character of patriotism, to build this character of activism. It has to start from a young age. And we will be talking to different stakeholders. We will be talking to different departments, your department of digital communications,
yes,
and them. We will be talking to them about the regulations and the things that are being played on TV. What else did you ask me?
No, I think you've covered the question about installing leadership. Understanding political leadership, and I think you've answered it there. One question I want to get in, Siphiwe, before you wrap up this conversation. COSAS, within the resolution, I want to ask Palestine, is that part of the solidarity with Palestine? I know that ANC, the Youth League, CESCO, they've stood in solidarity with Palestine. Is education about Palestine, given our history and obviously looking what is currently happening in Palestine, is that something that COSAS would like to see implemented?
Yes, we are aware of what is happening between that part of the country, between the Israelites and the Palestinians. And we are aware that the people who are most affected are scholars. I mean, you have more than 600 schools damaged.
Well, out of the 42,000 that have been killed, nearly 42,000, 60% are children.
60% are children. But all we have to say is that that part of the country, we want to see peace in the land of the Palestinians and the Israelis. We want to see them coexist. So we want, by the way, myself, I always pray for peace in that part of the world.
Okay. Siphiwe, we've come to the end of the conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. Much appreciated.
Hopefully you'll give our head of international relations, the deputy president of COSAS, an opportunity to maybe speak about the issue.
I will
because
definitely.
She is passionate about what is happening.
We will definitely make contact. Siphiwe, thank you so much for joining us. Much appreciated. That's Siphiwe Maname. He is an NEC member of COSAS. Well, that's all we have for you here on News in Focus. From myself, Ross Patel, the rest of the team in Johannesburg. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.